thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Today the topic is AI and language teaching and learning.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Two linked stories feature on the BBC News website. The first is an in-depth piece on tuition fees and government funding for higher education, with 141 UK universities now calling for change. Whilst many universities have previously made comments on the funding crisis, the BBC Today programme says Universities UK is now saying that a rise in tuition fees and more government investment is needed so that the sector does not slide into decline. This comes as record numbers of home students begin courses this month, but the number of international students is down. About 40% of universities are expecting to return a budget deficit this year, according to the regulator, the Office for Students. Universities UK says that if investment in teaching students had kept up with inflation funding per student, it would be in the region of £12,000 to £13,000. Higher Education Policy Institute says it would be politically difficult to put up fees, but there needs to be a decision about funding. Changes to visa rules and a currency crash in Nigeria have reduced applications for students from abroad. Whilst the cost of living crisis means students now need about £18,000 a year to live on, but the maximum loan amount is £10,000. The full Today programme is available on BBC Sounds. Meanwhile, another story is the amount of debt graduates are leaving university with. The BBC focuses on those graduates who took out loans in England and Wales between 2012 and 2023, when interest rates hit 8%. The article tells the story of graduate Adam, who borrowed £44,000 and has paid back £7,000 since graduating 4 years ago, but now owes £54,000. Despite having a good job, his salary isn't even covering the interest on the debt, and the amount is going up, not down. This situation predominantly affects those on Plan 2 loans, with some graduates reporting that the repayments are making applying for mortgages difficult, and others viewing it as a tax on graduates. The Save the Student campaign group says it could, but shouldn't, put students off. Whichever way we look at it, it seems the issues of funding, tuition fees and student loans are something the government will need to tackle, although a Department for Education spokesperson acknowledged it's going to take time to get it right. In the world of online technology, something many young people use regularly, Instagram has said it is overhauling the way it works for teenagers. In a press release, it promised more built-in protections for young people and said it had added controls for parents. The new teen accounts have been introduced in the UK, as well as the US, Canada and Australia. This means privacy settings will be activated by default for all under 18s, including making content unviewable for people who don't follow them, and actively require approval for all new followers. Children aged 13 to 15 will only be able to adjust these settings by adding a parent or guardian to their account. The UK children's charity, the NSPCC, responded to Instagram's announcement by calling it a step in the right direction, but said it must also be backed up by proactive measures that prevent harmful content in the first place. Further details of this story can be found online. The Guardian reports on school uniforms in France. Uniforms have not been compulsory in state schools in France since 1968. They have made a return in one town to establish if they can reduce inequality and improve behaviour. The school uniform debate has long been a focus of discussion in the UK and has sometimes been seen as something of a polarising topic. In France, 700 pupils at 4 schools in Béziers are taking part in the scheme that the government says could be rolled out nationwide, if it is successful. A French government minister said, "We would like to see if wearing a uniform can create tranquility in classrooms, because we know you learn better in a peaceful environment." The mayor of Béziers said uniforms would help combat bullying, but a teachers' union said it was a superficial response to a fundamental problem and would in no way help resolve troubles. Some parents have objected to the uniform, saying that public schools should not ape the worst excesses of private schools. This was written in an open letter of protest. Uniforms were first introduced in France in 1802 by Napoleon, but have not been compulsory since 1968. Whatever the outcome of the pilot, it seems clear that the topic of uniform is a hot one. Finally, BBC Leicester covers the story of Billy, the emotional support tortoise, who can be found working in a Leicestershire school. Billy, aged 11, wanders the corridors and has a heart-shaped balloon attached to his shell so students can see him coming. He's described as a calming presence who works in the school's learning support department, helping students who are feeling overwhelmed. Billy has his own lanyard carrying his photo and his official title. He works hard to support pupils by being lovely, fun and cute. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. And I am very pleased to have as my special guest today, Joe Dell, joining me from the Isle of Wight, I believe, in the UK. Joe, how are you and what have you been up to recently?
But yeah, the vast majority of work I'm doing is around AI, and exactly what you've just said. There are certainly fears or concerns around the use of AI, but I also think there's a lot of positivity and a lot of people trying to push the envelope and see what it can really do. Yeah,
definitely. So perhaps we can just jump into it, dive into that AI pool straight away, Joe, if that sounds okay. I think I would love to hear from you kind of what do you think is the snapshot of, as you're talking to so many teachers and doing so many presentations on this at the moment and workshops, how do teachers feel about the use of artificial intelligence in language teaching at the moment?
So I think that a lot of people have now dabbled a little bit. I normally start off my presentations by asking what sort of uses have people put to AI. And when I first started doing this sort of like a year and a half ago, there was really just a matter of a few people that had, for example, created lesson plans or created different types of text or created maybe some material for worksheets. Whereas now I think those people who are more interested and have been playing around with these sorts of things a lot more, then there were many, many more people that will then put their hands up either face to face or virtually and will say the sorts of things that I've talked about. But I found that if you're in a community, in a group of like-minded people, then you can share lots of interesting ideas. So I think we're very much at the beginning of this, and I think that I think I'm right in saying that I saw some research recently that said about 50% of teachers at secondary level haven't even touched any AI at all, and therefore we're still very much at the early steps. But the early adopters have been having a lot of fun, I think, in trying out different ideas for sure, which I would love to dig into further in this conversation.
Oh, definitely, and we'll definitely do that. I'm really interested in hearing more about what you've been able to discover. But before we go there, I can see there has been a kind of pushback on, hasn't there? So apart from the teachers who are staying away from it, either because they think it doesn't concern them, or that they're afraid of it, or they're reacting against using it. There's also a lot of teachers who, as you say, the early adopters who have sort of embraced the use of AI in education, in language teaching and learning, for example. Is it so divided, do you think? Are they kind of, the people who are sort of really against it and the people who are really for it? Or is it sort of, as I imagine, kind of shades of grey in between?
I think certainly in the training sessions that I've been doing, I find that most people are very positive about the potential of AI, but what they like to see is practical examples in their own subject area to see how it can actually work. You always get one or two people that will talk about how do we know what the AI is producing is actually true. And of course, I remind people that they have to check everything that AI produces from the point of view of accuracy and from the point of view of bias. But I think that when you actually show things being created live, people understand and can see how powerful it can be, but at the same time appreciate that from time to time the AI will make mistakes, but they can see that in the long term that they can use this for saving them a lot of time. So it may be, for example, let's say if they're creating a lesson plan and it takes them, let's say, 10 minutes to produce a basic lesson plan, which they can then add to and augment and edit, etc. That potentially could have saved them a couple of hours. So it might be that, yes, okay, it takes them 10 minutes or so to edit it, but if they've then got back a couple of hours, it means they have more time for doing other things, which might be more school-related tasks, or it might be more time with the family, for example.
Yes, and that's really where I think the benefits for teachers come in. I'm sure you'll agree to a certain extent. It's like using AI can really save time for teachers. Is that the main benefit, do you think, for teachers to try and persuade teachers who haven't already started looking at AI to dip their foot in the water?
I think that's one of the major benefits for sure. But I think it's not just about that. I think that, there's the argument that if you're creating a lesson plan or a resource with AI and you're over relying on it, it's going to produce some sort of cognitive atrophy. In other words, you're going to become less critical about the content which you are producing. You're just not editing it, just putting it out as it is, which I don't think is the case at all, actually. I think that when you ask the AI to produce content, actually your critical thinking skills, well, for me anyway, and I'm sure for lots of other people as well, are actually put more to the fore because of the fact that you are looking for inaccuracies or bias or what have you. And actually, I find the AI as a type of sounding board or learning buddy, which allows me to, if you like, channel my creativity or remind me of things that maybe I've done previously. So it can sort of spark my imagination. I can come up with a very sort of vanilla general prompt, but then within that response that I get from the AI, suddenly it can remind me of something that I've done previously, or it can send me off into a new avenue, etc. So I think that actually AI can be a wonderful way of really channeling your creativity and get you thinking about exactly what it is that you're trying to do. And I also think from the point of view of accessibility as well, I think that AI can play a very important role for considering different strategies that you can put into place to support all learners. For example, you might have a couple of dyslexic learners in your class and you can ask for strategies which can help to cater for their needs, for example, or any other diversity that you may have in your class. I think that AI can be very useful from that point of view as well, for sure.
Definitely. And I think you've hit upon an interesting thing there, that the use of AI in certain contexts can actually help with differentiation, for example, and give the opportunity for students to actually practice in ways that perhaps were not possible before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the whole sort of multimodal piece, I think, is particularly important nowadays with the AI revolution that we're seeing, because it's now very easy to create differentiated versions or versions for adaptive teaching a lot more easily, I think, and we can personalize the learning much more sensitively, I think, without having a huge time issue, a time sink on us for that. So I think, for example, creating different types of content for different learners within our class has now been made a lot easier using AI. So as a result of that, we can cater more individually to students. I think that I'm sure coming soon will be AI baked in more into assessment web tools, for example, so that we can, in fact, I know already that this is happening, in fact, that it will be able to, the AI will be able to analyze the learning of individual students and then give suggestions on what they can do to improve. So I think that we're only just at the beginning of this, and we're going to see AI, if it's not already, baked into all the popular tools that we like to use in schools.
Great. So, Joe, if I can, I'd like to sort of step back to, as you say, about a year and a half or so ago, 2 years ago, when these generative AI tools started appearing and started attracting your attention. What was it about them that made you think, aha, this is a really interesting area that I want to know more about and want to share with other teachers?
Well, as you know, for many years now, I've been interested in educational technology, particularly in the context of enhancing language learning. But I could see very quickly with ChatGPT, for example, which was probably the most well-known AI tool at the time, that early on from, let's say, the beginning of 2023, that it was having a huge impact on teachers. And the early adopters were really trying out different things and sharing their tweets and their blog posts and their LinkedIn posts and their Facebook posts and so on and so forth. And I could see very quickly that it was going to be a very powerful tool from the point of view of creating different types of texts in different languages, for example. And I remember that at the time, I had been helping to organize a whole range of different webinars for the Association for Language Learning that we called TILT, which stands for Technology and Language Teaching. And we had done up to that point around 150 webinars, which started from the beginning of March 2020, at the start of the pandemic, and then just carried on. And I remember Julia Morris, who's a language teacher in the southwest of England, had got in contact with my co-host Helen Myers, who's the chair of the London branch of ALL, and she had requested that she wanted to do an hour-long presentation on how ChatGPT could be used in language teaching. And that was, quite early on in February 2023. And then other people had got in contact as well, wanting to talk about the same topic. And so what we decided to do was to have an hour with Julia, and then to have a type of show and tell session also for an hour afterwards, where people either could join us live or could record pre-recorded videos, which we then shared. And each slot for the show and tell section was 5 minutes long. We had people from the States who either appeared live or sent recordings, or we had Francois Stolder from Hungary, for example. So it's a real international webinar, which was fantastic. And after that, we had Julia back for another session. We had other sessions as well from other speakers, and I could see. And so I then had a really, deep dive into finding out as much as I possibly could, particularly those people that were talking about AI in the context of language teaching. And through a huge amount of experimentation myself, I just found that it was incredibly powerful, and AI was having a huge impact. And there was a huge thirst for knowledge about the latest things that you can do with AI, and that hasn't stopped. Quite the opposite. In fact, that's getting, there's more and more interest, and that's why I do regard it in education anyway as a real AI revolution for sure.
Wonderful. And Joe, when these tools such as ChatGPT started appearing, the main concern from the educational community definitely seemed to be that students may well use them for cheating. Is that still a concern with the teachers that you talk to? And what's the current situation when it comes to that?
I think that's definitely a concern with lots of teachers. I think that for language teachers, this is in a way not a new phenomenon. Those teachers that have been dealing with Google Translate for many, many years, it's not new at all. But I think that the good advice around this really is the bottom line is knowing your students. So if you know the sort of level that your students should be producing, if suddenly a student comes in and is producing a level of language far higher than based on previous texts, etc., that they've written, almost certainly is not their own work. And then you ask them about the work they produced and they can't actually tell you what it's all about, then maybe it suggests that it's not completely their own work. But I do suggest strategies around this. For example, apart from the red flag of the fact, let's say that they're producing text including the present subjunctive and they're only in year 7 or 12 years old, for example, and they've only just been learning, let's say, English or French, whichever language it may be, for a few weeks, and they're suddenly producing very advanced structures. Maybe it's not completely their own work, but there's also some AI solutions to this as well. I would say that a lot of AI detectors are not reliable at all. In fact, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, has said this themselves, because they produce a lot of false positives. In other words, the AI will say, oh yes, this has definitely been written by AI, when it hasn't been necessarily, or vice versa. Or savvy students can find ways and means of getting around this by maybe running the prompt through one AI and then running the answer through another AI, or asking it to make deliberate mistakes, and so on and so forth. So there are ways and means of, if you like, fooling the system. But I also think that by, let's say, using a tool, take a text and turn it into a multiple choice quiz, like a Google quiz or a Microsoft quiz, and you could then give that to a student who is saying that this is definitely their work they produced. And if let's, for example, they only get 2 out of 10, then again, that could be an indication that it's not their own work. Or schools and educational institutions can consider other methods of formative assessment or summative assessment, e.g., I know yourself, Graham, you're a big fan of audio, so why not ask the students to record their answers in audio format or in video format? And again, it would be very obvious if they're just reading off the text from, say, ChatGPT. I suppose they could use a TTS tool and mimic their voice, but then at the same time, probably that would be not accurate enough, even if they clone their own voice, which is something I wouldn't recommend, certainly for secondary school aged students. But I do think that in general, the general takeaway from all of this, I think, and everyone is trying to grapple with this all over the world, educational institutions, universities, etc., is they're considering what are different forms of assessment or different ways we can gauge the learning from students in this age of AI, as well as going back to paper and pencil exams as well. But I think the bottom line is, if students are over relying on the use of AI, when it actually comes to a final exam, when they won't have access to AI, then they're going to be doing themselves a disservice, which of course they know, don't they? They know that. But I appreciate some of the students will just want to find a shortcut, a quick fix to get their homework in because they want to do something else, whatever that may be. And they don't think about the long-term impact of the over-reliance of AI as a shortcut.
Yes, and of course, it's not just in education where people are using AI for shortcuts. In the world of work as well, AI has been embraced by so many people and so many companies, etc. And a lot of people are trying to use it to save time there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a phenomenon we're seeing all over the world. We're seeing every sector trying to find ways in which they can harness AI as a way, as you say, of saving time. But at the same time, I think that there are, if you like, some winners and losers in this, because, for example, in Hollywood, there are lots of people who work in the entertainment business who are absolutely up in arms about the fact that they feel that they are losing their livelihoods because of the fact that, let's say, if they're a script writer, it might be that they're not being hired because of the fact that someone is hiring a smaller team, because one of the members of that team, if you like, is the AI, which is then meaning that it's going to cost them less money to, for example, put together a script, which nowadays, certainly in the States, it tends to be written by a committee, or it's not just one person necessarily. Those days are long and gone, I think, certainly for the big shows in the States. And so you can imagine there are lots of people who are up in arms about that. Also artists as well, who feel as if they're having their genre of artwork they've spent a lot of time perfecting, etc., is being essentially ripped off by AI models, and people now are able to produce artwork using the same sorts of genres and themes, but the person who came up with that, who spent a lot of time and effort doing that, is not being remunerated in any way whatsoever. And I'm sure that we're going to see more and more lawsuits against companies such as OpenAI around this area.
Yes, that ability to create art through words is a really interesting development. Obviously, for artists, it's a big threat, and it's almost as if if you're going to do that, if you're going to use prompts to actually create graphic images, art, etc., then knowing about art has become just as important or more important than actually being able to draw yourself, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. I think that on the one hand, from an education point of view, it has lowered the bar in producing high quality bespoke images, which I think in the language teaching context is great news, in the way in which teachers and students can produce bespoke images as a way of, if you like, dual coding, as a way of remembering a particular context or structure based on some sort of visual imagery around that, or a particular word, let's say, that sounds a bit like another word in another language. So, for example, you're learning a word in Spanish, which reminds you of a word in English, even though they may be false friends, as it were. They may not have anything to do with each other, but you could create a bespoke image combining those two words. That would be fantastic. To give you an accurate example of that, the word watch in Spanish is reloj, which sounds a bit like Loch, as in Loch Ness Monster. So you could, for example, and this is not my own idea, this is Vincent Everett from England who came up with this idea. So he created an image of a Loch Ness Monster with a huge watch around its neck as a way of promoting dual coding with his students. And he found that was incredibly useful and powerful. So there are winners and losers, I've said already. But I think from the point of view of language teaching, using these sorts of AI text-to-image tools can be very, very useful and powerful. And in a way, we're very sort of at the beginning of text-to-video, but with text-to-music, with tools like Suno, for example, or Udio. Although I believe these tools, you have to be 18 or above. So I'd only recommend that teachers are using these to create content, let's say for the language teaching classroom. You can literally make a song with bespoke lyrics on any topic you would like. For example, a topic that you're teaching in class in that language that you're teaching in, with a cool soundtrack, etc. So again, the reason that is possible, presumably, is because the company behind that large language model, or those large language models, they have scraped or fed into their model huge amounts of presumably commercially produced music. And again, the artists have not been remunerated for that. So there's big ethical and financial issues around the use of AI for sure.
Yes, definitely. This is what has caused so much concern, etc., about that. But the people who, there are people who argue, well, learning from others is how everyone does it. So as a human, it's how you learn how to draw, how to make music, etc. You listen, you things, you try to emulate, etc. So in a way, there are lots of people who are arguing, well, this is just the way that people do it as well. So it doesn't really, it shouldn't be problematic. What would you say about that? Do you agree with that? Or do you think that actually there should be some kind of compensation if an AI is trained on other people's music or art?
I think that if it's directly affecting your livelihood, you're going to have a very strong opinion on this. Mm-hmm. If it's not affecting your livelihood, then you might think to yourself, well, it's all about sharing. It's all about understanding different genres and what other people have been producing. And I'm not just copying it. I'm just sort of imitating what they've done, or I'm making something up which sounds a little bit like something else, but it's not exactly the same. I can see that argument, but I think for those artists and those musicians, etc., who have, as well, to be frank, had a really bad couple of years as a result of the pandemic, and if they're based in the UK, Brexit, and issues that they've had around making money that way, I think that they would have a completely different point of view. So I think we need to be sensitive to this. Yes, it is amazing what you can do with AI, but where has that data come from? And then in relation to biases as well, I think that's also really important. The fact that every data set which is fed into a large language model, and obviously each data set will be different, we need to, in lots of ways, have an understanding of where that data set has been taken from. And there's this idea of the WEIRD framework, so WEIRD, which stands for Western, Educated, Industrial, Rich, and Democratic. In other words, the suggestion is that most of the data which has been fed into large language models have been taken from these sectors, if you like, in society, which essentially means normally a lot has come from the US. And as a result of that, when we put in prompts to produce text or images or video or audio, then the results, for example, with images, can certainly result in biased responses. In other words, if you were to put in, create an image of a teacher in a classroom, then probably the teacher will be female, and probably there won't be a diverse range of different backgrounds and ethnicities in that class, and they'll probably all be white and Western. I don't know what you feel about that, but I think that's definitely something we need to consider when we are prompt engineering, to make sure that we do ask the AI to produce more diverse results for obvious reasons.
Yes, the idea of bias has become a kind of hot topic, I think, at the moment, hasn't it? And it is problematic. But I think what you just said, actually, about the ability to change your prompts is the way that we should move forward with that. I do think that in the future, a lot of these generative AI programs will get better, and the biases will be removed, or at least I'm hopeful that will happen. But at the moment, I think there is a real opportunity as educators for drawing attention to this with students. So you can actually put in generic prompts and create images, for example, that obviously show biases. A good way of doing that would be in my context, as I work in Mexico, you could put in a kind of prompt saying a typical a street in Mexico, and see how representative, and have a discussion with the students, for example, about how representative that is and whether it actually looks or seems like something from their culture, and then work around that to kind of show the biases. And can you change a kind of challenge would be, can you change the prompt that you put in for these for generative AI to actually produce something a bit more representative? So I think there is an opportunity for learning, I think, in this, and that all comes down to using these tools critically, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I mentioned Vincent Everett a moment ago, and he's been very vocal about the fact that he feels that the fact that AI can hallucinate a lot or can come up with inaccurate information, that it's not fit for purpose in education, which I think is, personally, that's not a view that I agree with. But he's going down the narrative of the fact that the UK government, not only the current UK government, but the previous UK government, were suggesting that one way in which teachers could use AI would be a way of reducing their workload. But he is constantly, on a daily basis, posting screenshots of prompts that he's put in, which have not had necessarily the response that he's looking for. And one example of that, which made me think when you just mentioned about a Mexican street, for example, is he has experimented by putting in a prompt along the lines of write a text about a Mexican person traveling to the States. And I think 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, the AI decides that this Mexican person is in fact an illegal immigrant, and they have come into the US illegally, and so on and so forth, which obviously is incredibly problematic from the point of view of bias and racism and so on and so forth. And I thought that was very interesting. But again, I think the idea of being very careful with our prompting and making sure that we try to tweak our prompts by putting in appropriate parameters so that we do get the outcomes that we're looking for. And of course, if the AIs produce a text which we're not happy with, we can then manually change that as well. But I think around culture and let's say cultural events, I think the AI can have a tendency to hallucinate more. For example, again, another teacher I saw on Twitter, or Twitter X, I suppose we could say now, I still regard it as Twitter, was saying about they had asked the ChatGPT, I think it was, to produce a text around a cultural event in Germany, and it had done a very good job in creating this very detailed text about this cultural event in Germany. Unfortunately, the whole thing was completely made up and wasn't true at all. And so again, in relation to hallucinations and verifying everything that the AI produces, that's so important. And again, in relation to Castilian Spanish and Mexican Spanish, again, Vincent has pointed out in various screenshots that he has asked for the AI to suggest what is the meaning of a certain word in Mexico as opposed to in Spain. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it does get that wrong. But again, that must be to do with the data set and possibly this weird bias that I talked about earlier.
Yes. No, there's so much to think about when you use these tools. I think definitely there is a role for some people, and some people have definitely adopted that role to draw attention to the dangers and warning signs that using these tools, the bias, the hallucination, etc. I think we need to be aware of all that. But I think also there is a case to be argued that, well, these tools are out there, they're being used, they're in the world. We need to be able to help our students, for example, use them as best as they can, and to understand, to look critically, as you mentioned before, at them. And how can we do that? Because I don't think the alternative, which is banning them, ignoring them, isn't really appropriate or suitable either, because, as I said, they're out in the world.
Yeah, totally. I think what is key now, has been for since the launch of ChatGPT, etc., is working out what large language models are very good at doing and what is it that they're not so good at doing. For example, the classic, meme at the moment is how many R's are there in strawberry, and ChatGPT supposedly and other large language models can't do that at the moment simply because of the way in which AI works and with the token system, which essentially, for those people that don't know, essentially large language models are like sort of language predictors. They try to work out what the next part of a word is, or the next word following a word, or what the next sentence will be based on the logic of all the different texts that have been fed into it, and therefore it tries to sort of predict what is the most likely word or words that will then be produced in a particular text. So it's not particularly good in lots of ways of that sort of critical analysis which would be required in, let's say, saying the number of R's in the word strawberry, which obviously sounds like a very simple task, but it's an aspect of what AI is not very good at. But then again, if you break it down into saying each individual letter, so it understands more exactly what you're asking it to do, then it will do a much better job. And supposedly with the latest version of ChatGPT, which is 1.0, has more power in reasoning and will sort of show its steps, apparently. I do have access to it, but I haven't had time to explore it because only people with premium accounts with ChatGPT have access to it at the moment. And so what it does, it is slower compared to ChatGPT 4.0, but it will show its steps, show its working of it, like sort of in a maths problem, as it were. It will show the different steps. So from the point of view of logical reasoning, apparently it's much better at maths compared to the standard ChatGPT, and it can apparently cope better with those sorts of critical questions, such as, how do you add one item to another item? How do you say the number of letters in a word, etc.? And supposedly 1.0 has the ability to stand up with, sort of PhD standard, as it were. But I think it's working out the use cases where it's going to fit in best in, let's say, in an educational context in your particular subject. And so for languages, I think it's brilliant for creating a range of different texts, but it might not be as good at the, that sort of grammatical analysis, or maybe in light of, certainly in the modern foreign languages context, the fact that we have this new GCSE, which we're getting our students ready for as of next year, that has a dedicated vocabulary list from the exam boards AQA and EdXL. And one thing which teachers have been asking me, to explain if ChatGPT and other AI tools can do this, is to try and create a text which include as many vocabulary items from those dedicated lists as possible, because those are the words which obviously the children are being tested on. And therefore, if the AI can do that, so much the better. And that can be a challenge because of the fact that certainly if we're talking about a huge number of words, the number of words for foundation is 1,200 words, and the number of words for higher is 1,700 words. You can't put in, let's say, 1,200 words into a prompt in ChatGPT and say, could you please create a text including all these words, or a certain number of words. What you could do is you can identify from those word lists different words which go with a different theme, for example, and as long as they're not as many, let's say it was say 10 to 15 words, probably the AI would do a good job in creating a text which would include those particular words. Another technique which a lot of language teachers are using at the moment is using sentence builders or writing frames. And although I've not been able to work out a way in which AI can produce sentence builders, what it can do now with this new update or new AI feature called Vision, Vision can now read text within an image. So what you could do is you can take a screenshot of a sentence builder, and I've tried this myself, many times. You put it into ChatGPT, for example, and then say, could you now write a text using words from this image, from this sentence builder? And it can do that. So there's ways and means, and people like myself, other people as well, around the world, who are trying these different things out and sharing their experimentations. That's how we can all move forward and work out exactly how the AI can be best harnessed in our own subject area. Another similar tool, actually, in relation to using Vision is from Arizona State University, which is called the Image Accessibility Creator. And that's an amazing tool which allows you to input an image, and then it will then give you a detailed written description of what that image is showing, down to the colors of different items, the number of people, etc., etc. ChatGPT can do that as well, but the Image Accessibility Creator can go into a lot more detail. And then, of course, once you've generated that, you can copy that text, put it into, let's say, ChatGPT or another large language model such as Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot, and then you could say, here is a written description of an image. Could you now create an activity based on this description? And then say, for example, in ChatGPT, because with 4.0 now, you can now ask it to create a downloadable Word document or a downloadable PDF document. Even in the free version, you could say, okay, now that you've created this activity, could you now turn this into a downloadable Word document with the image at the top of the worksheet, with a name and the group, with sections there for the students to fill in, and then the activity underneath, or a number of activities based on that image or that written description of that image. And to me, that's just mind-blowing. The fact that we can now do that, whereas a year and a half ago, I would have had no idea that was possible, is very, very exciting as a way of saving time, for sure.
Yeah, that's really useful information, really practical information, Joe. So thanks for sharing that. We've got some questions and comments in the chat, actually, mainly from Chris Fry from Barcelona. Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining us again. And one of the questions that Chris asked right at the beginning of the conversation was, the best way to use Gen I is probably on mobiles, but the use of mobile phones in classes can't be guaranteed. There's a movement to ban mobiles in schools, and not all students actually have mobile phones. So what's the solution? Do you have any opinion on that, Joe?
Well, I think it's debatable to say that the best way of using Gen AI is on mobile phones for a kickoff. As you say, there are lots of schools which are banning mobile phones, or only allow students to sort of, bring in their mobile phones, but they've got to then leave them at the desk and then pick them up at the end of the day, etc. Or they're only being allowed to get them out with certain, structured activities. So I think that is obviously an issue, but I think that we need to be mindful of the fact that if we're using, let's say, ChatGPT in the classroom, that we need to make sure that we adhere to the terms and conditions of every single tool that we might want to use. For example, with ChatGPT, students have to be 13 or above, and they need to have parental permission. And this is advice which has come from the UK government, for example, in the UK context. But I know that there are similar policies from, say, Australia and other places. I recognise that in the States, there's not a nationwide policy yet of the use of AI in education, although I know that organisations such as UNESCO in Europe have produced very useful frameworks recently. So I think we need to be very mindful of the fact that we need to make sure that we do not only follow the national guidance on the use of AI, but also I would hope that all schools now have got an AI policy, which again, we need to make sure that we adhere to as well. But I think that in the examples that I've seen, it tends to be, or let's say the more sort of proactive users of AI, who are, let's say, in the languages classroom, is they're using the AI a little bit like what I was saying about earlier, putting in a prompt, let's say, to do with a topic that they're studying. Let's say the use of the perfect tense in French, for example. They're getting the AI to produce a text focusing on that particular grammar point, and maybe highlighting the fact that it has made mistakes, that it has hallucinated, and getting the students to work that out for themselves. So if you like, that they are having that challenge to see whether they are better at understanding the topic than the AI, which I think is a lot of fun. But I think that there are tools out there which are, for example, GDPR compliant, FERPA and COPPA compliant, such as Mizu, which is an amazing tool, I think, for those people that don't know. It allows you to make your own educational chatbot as a teacher, which could be on any subject, any topic. In languages, when I'm demonstrating this, I tend to put in the sort of prompt which is saying, you are Pierre, a waiter in a French cafe. Obviously, I do other languages as well, depending on who I'm talking with. You are Pierre, you're a waiter in a French cafe. I want my students to order food and drink from you. They are working at A1 level French, for example, so it understands the CFR levels. And I would like you to respond in short, simple sentences. always be kind and polite, for example. Now, because of the fact that this tool says in its children's privacy policy that it is GDPR compliant, etc., that it won't sell the data of what the students have input, it won't give them adverts and so on and so forth, and the fact that it's an amazing way in which they can practice their speaking skills, they can either write in their answer in the interactive dialogue they have with the chatbot, or they can record their voice, which is then very, very accurately transcribed, presumably using the AI tool called Whisper, which is very, very accurate in transcription. And then it will then send the answer to the chatbot then reads that and responds. And this is an amazing way in which AI, I think, can promote independence and agency with the students, and the fact they could potentially record themselves at home in the privacy of their own homes when maybe they feel less inhibited because they don't have their peers around them, particularly for, say, the shyer students. And then not only does the teacher get to see the whole transcript once the student has ended the session, but also the AI is then used to generate a feedback based on the transcript. And in that transcript as well, the teacher can get to listen to anything that the student has recorded, as well as see any interaction that the chatbot and the student have had together. So the fact that the AI can generate feedback, personalized feedback based on the individual input from the student is very, very powerful. And the teacher can then decide whether they share that feedback with the student or not. And I think that sort of tool, and there are other chatbots out there as well. There's one from School AI, there's one in Magic School as well, which is sort of like referred to as a wrapper tool. In other words, it's got ChatGPT running in the guts in the background, but it's called a wrapper tool because of the fact that the interface has been designed to be particularly appealing to educators, because it's, you know, as simple as possible to put together. You have lots of different recipes, things like lesson plan generator or YouTube question generator or rubric generator or that sort of thing. So I think that the more that educational companies are changing and adapting to this AI revolution and making sure that, for example, their tools are GDPR compliant, etc., that there'll be more adoption from school, particularly amongst students in a school environment, for them to be using these different tools. But even from early 2023, I was hearing of some teachers who were allowing their students to be using, let's say, ChatGPT in class, but were maybe a bit hazy about whether they actually needed to get parental permission. But I think when the UK government came out with this advice, it was very, very clear. But even now, when I'm talking at conferences, etc., some people look at me blankly as if they didn't realise that actually, you know, students have to be 13 and above and need parental permission to use these sorts of tools. So I think there's still a lot of learning to be that needs to happen before we have any sort of level playing field, for sure.
Yes, that's so important that schools and governments, UK government seems to be on the case, for example, have come out with guidance and guidelines and make it clear to teachers what they should do. I think is really important. And one thing you touched upon, which I think is really interesting, is that this move away from ChatGPT. ChatGPT may not be, it seems you're saying, and I think I agree with you, the best tool for teachers to actually use when it comes to integrating AI into their classrooms if they want to do so. That there are now other tools that are far more compliant, if you like, or far more aligned to educational use that are more appropriate, like Mizu, as you said.
Mm. Well, I think that you can do most things, if not everything, that you can do with these other tools in your basic ChatGPT. But I think as an interface, maybe there are some teachers that find it a bit baffling and don't really know where to start. Whereas if you have a wrapper type of tool, such as Magic School, there's also EduAid as well, which is seen as, if you like, a Swiss Army knife of different recipes for creating educational content. Then maybe those are easier to access and to get started with. But I think that again, for those fans of ChatGPT, you can do most things with it, but it just requires a bit more detailed prompt engineering. Whereas I think with the guardrails or the prompting which is happening in the background, this idea of not only a large language model, but a small language model. So in other words, a more bespoke language model which has more bespoke data within it, and they can sort of speak to each other and work out what is the best solution based on the prompt that's been put into them, they can be also very effective. And I think that's probably going to be the way that we go in education. It won't just be about just using one large language models. It will actually be language models speaking to each other in order to try and get the best outcomes. I mean, with that in mind, for example, one of my favorite AI tools at the moment is Perplexity AI, because the way it works, it's like a search engine. So it is very, very up to date with the results it produces, whereas with ChatGPT, it's all about the latest version of the data set which has been fed into it, which can't be absolutely up to date. So, for example, to give an example of this, previously, with ChatGPT 3.5, which is the original free version, and then ChatGPT 4, if you said, let's say 6 months ago or a year ago, who is the current UK monarch, if you were using 3.5, it would say Elizabeth II. Whereas if you said with ChatGPT 4, it would say King Charles III, because of the fact that the data only went up to a certain point. Whereas with Perplexity, what it does is it allows you to search for a very, very up-to-date question, and then it will then find a number of sources, normally 6, but it can be as many as 8, to do with that particular topic. And you can see all those sources, and if there are some sources you feel are not bona fide, you can always remove one of those sources. But then what it does is it uses the AI to make a summary of all those different results, which again, you can then easily share via a link, or you can share via the output which it's produced. Plus it has all the different citations as well of all the references that it's made. So I think that is a really nice tool, which potentially you could use in education, even without having a login, although your prompts are then not archived. But again, officially with Perplexity, you need to be 17 or above to use that particular tool. So there's a lot of ignorance out there, I think, at the moment about the terms and conditions and the privacy policy, the different tools. And that's something that we just all need to equip ourselves with the knowledge of exactly what you can and cannot do with these different tools, I think.
That's fantastic, Joe. I think what I love about you is you're always full of great work through practical examples for teachers, and very generous with your time and knowledge, as definitely, which I know that teachers really appreciate what you share. So thank you very much for that. We are kind of coming around to the end of the program. We've got about 10 minutes left, which we do have a lot we can say in 10 minutes, but just wanted to ask you if there are any other kind of hot topics that you have around AI and language teaching and learning at the moment that you haven't already talked about, and what you. So on the first question is that, is there anything that you haven't mentioned so far that you think would be really useful for teachers to know about? And then the other thing would be, how do you see this developing in the next 6 months, year? In what ways do you think language teaching and learning and AI will be developing?
Wow. Okay. So quite a few small topics there. So I think I'll start off by, again, sharing some of my sort of favorite discoveries. In this long directory of AI tools that I put together, one of the sections of which I mentioned earlier is to do with mapping, which may not be an obvious fit in languages, but of course, actually, this is a cross-curricular idea. But what I've worked out how to do is I've worked out how you can get ChatGPT, for example, to create code for your block code, which then allows you to create different activities to do with, for example, Google Earth projects. So with Google Earth projects, if people don't know, you have to create text using what's called KML. The KML format is the text format which Google Earth requires for it to create a customized map. And so what I worked out how to do, I just worked this out off the top of my head, just because I thought it'd be an interesting thing to do. I've created a prompt which essentially allows you to create 5 or 10 different pins on a particular location, let's say Paris or Madrid or wherever it may be. And for each pin, when you click on that pin, then a little pop-up will appear with a title, with a question, with 4 possible answers. And all of that I've been able to create via a prompt in ChatGPT. But what's interesting is with 4.0 now, you can actually export the results as a KML file, whereas before what I was doing was I was getting ChatGPT to generate the code for me, copying the code, and then using a tool like Notepad on PC or TextEdit if I was on my Mac, which are just default text editors which come with your operating system, pasting the code into that and then saving it as a KML file as opposed to a TXT file. And then as a result of that, being able to go to Google Earth, clicking on the import option, import local file, and then suddenly you sort of zoom to wherever it is that you decided to look at in Google Earth with all the pins all there for you. So it saves a huge amount of time. You can then click on the individual pins and you can then find out some information about those places, obviously in the target language, if that's what you've asked it to do in the prompt. And then you can also go into Street View as well. So you can click on the little yellow man, go to a particular place, and then you'll go into a 360-degree photo as if you're actually there. So I think that's an amazing way of promoting intercultural understanding, involving an intercultural dimension in your lessons, which obviously would work in languages, but also in any subject for that matter. And then a similar idea, also using Google, is using Google Mind Maps, which has been around for years and years, but maybe people haven't heard about it. What Google Mind Maps allows you to do is similar to Google Maps, but again, it can allow you to make your own bespoke your own bespoke maps. So what I worked out how to do is create a table with 2 columns with the place on the left-hand side, the first column, and on the right-hand side, a description of that place with questions, etc. And then from there, copy and paste that from the table it can make in ChatGPT and other large language models. People don't know large language models are very good at making tables, but you can then copy the results from that table into a Google Sheet, and then you can go to Google My Maps, click on the import option, go to your Google Drive, import that Google Sheet, and again, it will then populate the map with different pins, and then you can click on the edit option for that particular pin, and then you can then add your own images or add your own description, which again could be done in the target language. You could do that either manually if you wanted to, or get the students to do that, and then they could use some sort of screen recording software like Loom or Screencastify to record their screen while they are recording a voiceover. So it's good for practicing their writing and for their speaking. And if they have a partner school, they could then share the results with their partner school, or they could collaborate together on the same Google map. And then very recently, I was inspired by a teacher, William Van Rijk from London, who had posted about the fact that he'd worked out that the latest version of ChatGPT can actually create its own map with different pins, plotting different pins onto that map. So you don't actually need the other tools that I mentioned. And that uses what's called OpenStreetMap, which is an open source mapping tool, but it's actually incorporated, it uses that tool when you create the map within ChatGPT. So you don't actually need to know it's OpenStreetMap. But again, I worked out a prompt which would allow me to create 10 different pins for places, for example, around Paris. And if you click on each pin, it will then have a little pop-up with a description at A1 level French, let's say, or whatever it might be, whatever you decide to use it for, and then the questions. And then again, you can then take that content, because as part of the prompt, you can say, put all the list of questions and multiple choice possibilities underneath the map, or as a separate output from the map that you then generate, and then take that content and turn it into an interactive Google quiz or Microsoft quiz using Brisk. So as you know, I'm a fan of app smashing, Graham, and so using these sorts of different tools to produce a final outcome, I think is really exciting. And that particular post on my Facebook group has had a lot of love, a lot of likes, etc. And recently, I don't know if you've had a play with the new Google tool, Notebook LM, but you can create a PDF or just paste in the text, and it will automatically create, using what's called audio overview, it will create an AI-produced podcast with 2 AI-produced podcasters, one male, one female, who can then talk about the PDF or the text you put in. So I created an example, which I've blogged about on my Facebook group, of both of them discussing the content of the post which I wrote, which was just amazing. And I've seen lots of examples of people putting in PDFs of books or of articles they've written, and it's just another way of learning, like a multimodal way of learning that I talked about earlier. So for some people, they may prefer to listen to an audio version of a text whereby two people are discussing that sort of conversational piece around that text as a way of embedding the ideas in their own brains, as it were. So for those people that haven't tried Notebook LM or mapping using Google Earth projects, Google Mind Maps or OpenStreetMaps in ChatGPT, I would really encourage you, whatever subject you teach, to try it out, because I think that could be very, very useful for sure.
That's fantastic, Joe. I'm always fascinated to hear about all of the things that you've discovered and the experiments that you're doing, in particular recently with AI, and your Facebook group that you started is a really great place, I think, for teachers to begin if they want to know more and learn from everybody. So thank you for setting that up and for sharing it with everybody.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. I love coming on podcasts, as you know, and talking about these things. And it feels like you're on the spot. You've got to sort of come up with something reasonably coherent. So it's a lot of fun to, if you like, share my experimentations with the hope that it will inspire other people, that they will try these things out as well, and then give me feedback, give other people feedback as well. And that's what it's all about. It's all about learning and community and sharing ideas, because we're all learning how to best employ these different AI tools, but at the same time keep ourselves safe, and most importantly, keep our students safe as well.
Yes, definitely. And I think the pace is so quick, that things are changing so quickly, and there is so much out there that is interesting to try, that the only really way to get your head around it is to share things with other people and to look at what other people are saying and doing. And you've mentioned a number of people who you've learned from today on today's show, and also there are so many people out there that have learned so much from you as well. So Joe, I think I need to wrap things up. I feel I could speak all day and you'd still have fascinating things to share, but I know that time is precious, and I'm sure you've got a lot more you need to do. So thank you very much for your time and for being so generous with your knowledge and information, Joe. I've really enjoyed speaking to you again.
I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity, Graham, and thank you for the opportunity to have a chat about one of my favourite subjects at the moment. It's been great, and thank you for all those great questions. Thank you to the audience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you. Thanks, Graham.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
So that brings us to the end of today's Sunday lunchtime show. Many thanks to today's special guest, Joe Dale, and all of you who joined us live, and to those listening back to the recording. That's it from me. There are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listen in live or to the recordings. And I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.